If you have ever left your characteristic way of behaving, of thinking, of doing, of being, if you have ever gotten off path, off track, and self sabotaged, this might be a big reason why. And of course, what we're talking about is how we interact with others around us. We have villains and we have friends and allies. Today, we're going to be looking at both of those things, but really, we're going to be zeroing in on the power of identifying your villain, the power of identifying your villain. Well, why is that important? First and foremost, confusion and frustration, those produce what? Inaction. Anytime you are confused, you're full of doubt, you're full of fear, you're full of frustration, you're gonna fight, flight, or freeze. That's where you're going. Fight, flight, or freeze. Do you want to know one of the biggest reasons that we stop doing the thing, whatever the thing is? It's because we are scared. And the reason we're scared, by the way, is completely normal because we're facing stuff that's not normal. It's not in our normal repertoire. Really, what's happening is we are going up against ourselves. It's almost like we give ourselves a little bit of a leash, but not too. And when we pull that leash too far, our brain just says, I'm stinking done, man. And you're going to fight, you're going to run, or you're going to freeze. Confusion and frustration produce inaction or sometimes the wrong action. Much of our frustration and confusion is from not seeing or labeling our villain, our resistance. Think about this. Why on earth is the boogeyman, right, this undefeatable enemy? Literally from the dawn of all ages, the boogeyman, what we're afraid of at night, right? He's there at night. Where is it? I don't know. Under my bed. If you're not completely covered up, he could get you. And you can't do anything about it. Why? Because no matter what you can do, he's always going to be that much bigger, that much stronger. Really, the truth of it is the strength of the boogeyman comes from the fact that the boogeyman is unseen. And because we don't see it, what do? We imagine it. We imagine things to be bigger and worse than they are. And don't we do that in our business, in our finances, and in our lives? So much of our frustration and confusion comes from our inability to actually properly frame what's happening. We're not seeing the villain. We're not seeing the correct thing to resist. What do? We end up resisting the wrong thing, fighting a weaker opponent that we know we can take. Maybe it's our spouse or our children or someone at work, right? It is hard to fight an enemy that we don't see. We know that fight or flight causes us to misjudge our situation and our ability. I can't tell you how many times I've watched capable people slip into the place of they couldn't do anything. I like to quote myself, we can forget our strength, that we can forget that we have the ability to deliver a knockout punch. That is the biggest travesty. I remember I was a teenager when I watched Buster Douglas knock out the undefeatable foe, Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was a monster of a boxer, and nobody wanted to face him because why? He was undefeatable. At least that's how he was imagined. Again, like the idea is how do we frame this is what matters. And the big deal is, are we even willing to be honest about what the villain is? And if you want to actually properly label what a villain is, all you have to do is look at where you want to get to, look at what it is that you want, and then look at the things in between you and that. And those things can be inside, they can be outside, they can be people, but truthfully, usually it's here, it's in the 6 inches right between the ears. That's where most villains exist. And so you most likely have been casting this out. Teenagers, they will make their mom or dad the villain. Why? Because I need someone to resist, right? And so what we do is we spend all of our lives resisting the things that actually were helping us. I don't want you to do that in your life or in your business. That's the way to be ineffective and to take confused and diffused action. And that's how we lose, guys. That's how we lose. What are some of the types of resistance? I see things as internal or external, right? Internal is in here. It's either imagined or it's a lack of ability or skill set mentally, right? It's an intelligence thing often time. It can be a programming thing for a lot of us, right? We settle on this is the way things are, this is the way things will be, this is how those people are, and we create this framework inside of our mind internally so that we can deal with the world. Now, if that framework is not something that is helpful towards what you're trying to get to, then guess what your villain is? It's that, right? Examples of that might be a lack or poverty type of a mindset, or a fear type of a mindset, or one that I've dealt with before is that inability to receive criticism, right? And so the inability to receive criticism was an internal thing because I said, criticism means I'm this. And that was so painful that I couldn't actually grow from something that was coming from external. Now, those are some examples of internal resistance, internal villains. Again, a lot of it's mindset. It could be learning. It could be some things that we don't know. That's an internal game. What about external villains? External villains aren't as many as we might imagine, but they exist, right? External villains is anything out there that's going to diminish or take away from, whether it's your objectives or someone else's, but specifically where you're going. Let's frame this for you and for your noble cause. And for you to be noble, sometimes we have to be able to see what is that other thing, right? If you are embracing knowledge right now, then ignorance is the villain, right? If you are embracing action right now, then an activity is the villain. If it's companionship and love, then being alone and withdrawn is the villain. So do you see how there's a yin yang to these things? There's that opposite thing. The whole idea is that whatever it is that you are moving into and I'm moving into, there are oppositional forces. There is a drag, there's a thrust and there's a drag, right? Back to the physics of flight. And that drag is what's keeping us away from what it is that we want. If we identify that, we can address it. If we don't, we're going to fight the wrong thing. External villains could be having no money. External villains could be having no job or it's like those are the things that are outside of us. But we've got to know which is which. Few examples that I've listed here is, again, resistance, villains, places where we can work at that are going to make our lives better. It's going to get us to where we want to be. But we have there are personal villains. There's personal resistance. It's inside. We talked about some of that programming. We have relational, and this can be you and your spouse, you and your kids, you and your team at work, right? Relational. And then business. What is in between your business being where it is now and where it's going to be? And actually, there's even a different type of resistance that I like to put out. And this is, hey, what villain do we fight? What is the villain that we vanquish as a business? So this is like the noble cause of our business. In a relationship, we can say, hey, what are the things that we can fight together so that we're not fighting each other? It can unify you in direction. Here's one principle I want you to take to the bank. Your team is not your problem. Your problem is your problem. So it's not your team, it's not your spouse, it's none of those things. It's the problem. Why am I saying that? Well, because too often, again, we will take an internal problem and we'll express anger. We'll do that fight or flight thing on other people. Or sometimes we'll take an external issue and what we'll do is we'll attack ourselves internally about our value and all of these things. Listen, the people aren't the problem. The problem's the problem. Okay? Unless, of course, there is a particular purveyor of that problem, then the person is a problem. I like to say this: I don't have problems. I have puzzles. I don't have problems. I have puzzles. Why do I say that? Because how you frame something is everything. It determines how you approach something, right? A problem is something that I don't know. Will I win? Will I not? I don't know. But a puzzle allows me to maintain that mindset of play, of hopefulness, of belief that I'll figure this thing out. So we're people who are not overcome by our problems. We're people who solve puzzles. Let's talk about some of the internal villains, internal resistance. With a lot of these, if we don't know these answers, what will happen is this is actually the real resistance, is that we haven't given ourselves the gift of being confident and clear on these things. And when we have no clarity on this, again, confusion exists. When confusion exists, that's where we spin our wheels. But internal problems, it's why am I doing this? What do I want? That's an internal problem, right? That's an internal villain. We've got to be able to say that. We need to know what that is. And we have to understand that can change. Who am I? I don't care how old you are or how many times you've answered that question. You still need to answer it, because what follows after that question is the most powerful thing you will say to yourself right now, today, and forever. I am blank. Have you ever had head trash that gets in your way and it tells you things like, I'm so stupid. Nobody showed up, or no one cares, or no one is there, or that didn't go great. I'm so stupid. That's one that some head trash I've carried with me before. And sometimes it still surfaces. So that's why it's important, right, to be able to not allow an external problem to become an internal issue. So knowing who I am, regardless of this stuff, allows me to approach things completely different. So being settled on that, what's the way that I do things? What is the way that I do things? For me personally, making things feel like fun instead of like work, making it feel like play instead of like hard labor. That's how I get stuff done. It makes it easier. Who am I helping? I think a lot of us frame things by who we serve. And I personally do call that the noble cause. If I can find a person and know that I'm helping that person, and it allows me to essentially enter in a way that can bear with a little bit of pain and tolerance. And then finally, am I worthy? A lot of this internal stuff, that understanding of who am I worthy? Am I worthy? A lot of us are out there trying to earn our worth, whether we do it through works or earnings or whatever. There's so many ways that we enter into that. And all of those end up being shallow pursuits. I'm going to look into this space where I think where a lot of our issues can happen, and it's in that personal realm. It's in that personal realm. If you want something personally, there's only two things that can separate you. Now, if you're a leader in business, you probably ask yourself about this. Like when you see someone not performing, the question is always, was it will or is it skill? That was always my question when I've led teams. Like, this is a will thing or is this a skill thing? And if it is a skill thing, I can certainly train the skill thing. If it's will, that can be a hard one to get in and operate, because again, we're talking about some of those questions that we were mentioning earlier. There's something in there, though, that I want to address right now, and it's willpower. Anytime we press into something new, it utilizes willpower. I'm not sure how you have seen it, but I see willpower as the amount of effort exerted in a new endeavor, right? Because our tendency is to be tethered to what we know, what we did yesterday, what the identity we had yesterday was. It's like it's a leash, right? And so what we tend to do is we say, I'm going to go do this new thing. And some of us are going beyond the strength of our willpower. Willpower is one of those things that can be built. It's not just like a standard amount. We develop willpower and we can expend our willpower. There's an exertion that you should deploy, but you don't want to overexert it. It's like muscles cramping up. I would liken it to holding your breath. People who are trying to improve their ability and their lung capacity, you can increase your capacity to hold your breath. I watched one of the magic people who was doing this stuff. I believe he held his breath 12 minutes. He was in ice. That's nuts. How can a human do that? We do that by exercising and increasing our capacity over time. You don't just do that. If I tried to do that, I would die or pass out. Our willpower is that as well. How long can you hold your breath? How long have you trained yourself to hold your breath? How long can you endure beyond your normal routine? It just depends on how much willpower you've exercised and grown. When we talk about will, we have to look at willpower because a lot of us want to be different, but our willpower is so small. And so what I would say is exert yourself, don't overexert yourself. So always stay within the realm of, hey, this is challenging, but I could probably keep this up for a while. When I work with people to develop habits, I often use marbles to do that because I see, hey, a tiny action taken regularly will eventually lead you to being able to do that behavior because you become that kind of person. And what happened was I didn't overexert anyone's willpower, just used a tiny bit and a tiny bit over a long period of time. It's a great way to build into something. So don't overexert when you're doing something new. If you're in the 12-week challenge and you're at that phase, welcome to the club. That's just what we typically do. We always bite off more than we can chew and just restore. Now, if you have overexerted your willpower, I would just say rest. I would say change your scenery. I would say, however it is that you restore yourself, do that. You need to allow yourself, just like working out, allow that restorative process to work before you go exert again. Let's talk about some villains in the family. There are so many examples of it, but again, remember that your family, your relationships are not the problem. The problem's the problem. The puzzle's the puzzle, and it can all be figured out. So maybe every time you talk, you fight. So if that's happening, the other person is not your problem, and you're not their problem. You know what the problem is? It's how we're talking. So if we can make that the villain and together decide that we will be against that thing, then it creates a line of separation between you and the thing that's actually causing the problem. And it unites you with your partner to go against something. You see how that works? Think about it. Budget, right? Maybe it's expenses and you're trying to create wealth. And well, maybe your villain is binge spending, or maybe it's Amazon or whatever it is. You can decide together, this is the villain and this will be defeated. This will not stand in between who we are and what we want. So we just did this together. We found $3,000 of monthly expenses and over $1,000 were completely unnecessary. So we had a villain that hadn't even been identified. Once we saw it, it was easy to execute. I had memberships I hadn't used in 6 months still charging me. That's horrible. Maybe your villain is the lack of order in the house. Remember, it's not okay to just to throw blame onto someone else. Let's share responsibility and respond as we are able, but let's look at what that villain is. And oftentimes it is a mindset combined with an action, right? Villains for your business. Now, this is a little bit different. I'm going to turn, instead of saying, hey, we're solving this, I want to talk about villains that you are vanquishing for your ideal person. So for me, one of my villains is I hate cookie cutter coaching. Hey, go to this program, go through this program, blah, 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 blah. And it's, where's the individuality in that? I believe that power comes from personal choice, not in walking through someone's lineup. Okay, so one of my villains is that lack of personalization. Another one of my villains I would say that I help with is disorder and chaos. I believe disorder and chaos cost you your dreams. So I help people create order and to create a plan. I think that us functioning from the place where we lack ability or authority, or we just aren't keyed in on who it is that we are, I really believe in empowering people from who they are, and from who you are right now is enough to handle any puzzle that's in your way. You can do this thing right now. We might have to remix some of your ingredients, but you have the ingredients, rather than coming from a place of saying you're not enough. So those are some of my villains. Maybe your villains are, if you run a service business, it's people showing up when they want to, or maybe people showing up who are hungover or unpresentable or smelly. Yeah, that's a villain, right? Maybe your industry, people have judged it to be like an MLM. And so maybe the villain is MLMs, right? And we can actually, it's saying, I'm not that, I'm this. And it just gives you a very clear line. And it's really cool because when we identify villains, it draws that line and it tells if other people see that same thing as a villain, what do? They get onto the same side of the line with you. You're with them, you're together. Villains are a great uniter because it shows what it is that we believe and, of course, what we're opposed to. I want to touch on one more thing and then I'm going to give you some challenges. Villains aren't the only ones that are going to come across our path. Friends and allies do as well. Just as your villain can help you to become resolute and to identify who you are and where you're going and why you're going there, friends and allies, they will help you. They will help you when you can't help yourself. And they are everywhere. The moment you step into any journey that is outside of the norm of where you are, where you were, you have access to these different resources of these different people. Why? Because they want to see you win. We want to see you win. So look for them first off and call upon them next off. Empower people who want to help you. You have friends and allies right now. You can learn from friends and allies, and you should learn. So you should be doing all of your skill stuff. Friends and allies, please. Right? Let's take a healthy, heaping dose of friends and allies. Those are the ones that you're going to grow your skills from. You trust them and you can learn faster from them. Don't minimize these people. Look at the gift that they have, look at what they have to offer, and see if there's anything for you to learn from. Abraham Lincoln said, "Every man is my teacher." Every person is your teacher as you go out and do what you're doing. And if you will humble yourself, if you'll look, I'm not saying you have to ask everyone to be your mentor, but certainly learn the lessons that each of these people are bringing to you. If there is someone who has a specific skill that you're looking for, ask, ask. And they will either teach you or they might be a great place to outsource that. I heard a funny quote. It's so funny how when you hear these things, just how sometimes, oh, wow, that's true. And the person said to me, I found that when I asked for money, people gave me advice. But when I asked for advice, people wanted to give me money. I would say when we find friends and allies, it's best to ask for advice. Sometimes they see things that you don't see, they know things that you don't know. And guess what? They all know people that you don't know. 100% of them are willing to look for you if you would call upon their power, call upon them as someone who could help. And I would just ask you, look through your Facebook, look through your contacts on your cell phone, look through these people and find a way to engage them. Just reach out and allow them to be on your team. I didn't want to talk about villains without talking about these other things that are there for your good as well. So, you ready for the challenge? All right. So we have a few of them. Some of these can be, I'm going to start off with that internal villain. And you might need to look at what your internal villains are. You might not even know what they are. As a matter of fact, most of us don't. And so one thing that you can do is that you can do a head trash cleanup. And all I would ask you to do here is anytime you hear yourself talking crap to you about you, write down what you're feeling, write down what you're saying. Do that for 3 days. Oh, I'm so positive, Donnie. I don't do that. Oh, I'll bet you do. I'll bet you do. I did this on a tiny journal one time, and I was surprised at how often I was talking trash to myself. And guess when I was doing it? When I was uncomfortable, when I was doing impactful things with the people that I wanted to be in front of. After I was done, I would come back and say, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid." That was like my go-to. Sometimes it still is. And so when I hear myself saying that, it's actually a good indicator that I'm pushing beyond the outer limits of my ability and willpower and all of that. It's just a really good indicator that I'm on the right track. Another one is team up. Identify with your spouse, with a business partner, with someone that you feel like you've been at an impasse. And so I'm going to ask you to identify a villain that you guys can take down together. Okay. What is it? It's taking something that's been embodied by a person and let's just find out what that is. You have to look at it and say, If he and she is not the problem, then what is the problem? And identifying it and deciding together, this is the villain. We are against this. I'm not against you. We're against. Another version of this is really looking at your people, the people you like to serve in business, so we can find the business villain and list out those villains that you fight. And maybe, by the way, this could be a great prompt for social media of all types. This will draw people to you. List out the type of villains that your business is here to vanquish, and then set your mission up to go do that. Those are a few challenges. If you have something else, you can certainly let me know. Oh, and the final one is, I would say, engage with a friend. Maybe just reach out to someone literally right now. Reach out to someone. They've been on your mind. They came to your brain. Pop a call to them, pop a text to them, a Facebook message, something like that. Reach out to them, try to connect with people. And if you know that there is a villain that you have just that's inside of your head, your heart, your mind, all of that stuff, those internal things, and you don't have someone that you've been talking to about that, find someone that you can make an ally so that you can call that boogeyman out so we can defeat that sucker. It's all about perspective. So go identify those villains and your friends and allies as well. We'll see you on the journey.